Would you have thought that small island nations like these could make deals with China on their own terms and wrangle a deal with Australia that pretty much no other country could? The Pacific Island countries are leveraging unique resources and a strategic location lots of big players want a piece of. While fighting for their very survival, how are the Pacific Islands turning the tables on much bigger players who once thought they could push them around? In the world's biggest ocean, where actually are the Pacific Islands? It's kind of hard to show them all together because they're so spread out and small in size. So let's picture them like this. Most Pacific Island countries consist of a group or even several groups of islands, so we drew a box around each country to separate them out. There are some overseas territories of much bigger countries here. But we're talking about these independent nations, the ones classed by the UN as small island developing states in the Pacific.
We live in a vast space that covers a third of the planet.
Anna Nauper is a researcher and policy advisor from the Pacific Island country of Vanuatu.
We might be small in number, but we are vast in global impact.
Before we get to that impact, let's get to know the islands a little better. Together, the islands are home to around 13 million people. As 11 million of them live in Papua New Guinea, you can imagine that the rest of the countries have quite small populations, one of the smallest being Tuvalu, with under 10,000 people. They have diverse cultures, but also a common Pacific identity. Many of the island nations, like Tonga, were created through volcanic eruptions, and some of those volcanoes are still active. The Pacific Islands have incredible biodiversity. They have small economies, mostly based on fishing, tourism, and agriculture. The police is the main security force because most of them don't have a military. But bigger players with interests here are very much interested in military force. Australia, the closest big power in the region, is a US and UK ally. Those three countries are teaming up to station nuclear submarines here on Australia's west coast. They want to beef up strategic locations in the region. The US military has access to or has used these facilities. The Pacific is right between the US and its rival superpower, China. Those two countries are increasingly competing with each other here, where tensions are mounting, especially around Taiwan.
Both sides have what they would argue are legitimate interests. I mean, you can understand where China's coming from here. It sees a US presence there and it finds that threatening.
Joanne Wallace is a professor at the University of Adelaide.
But as an Australian whose country is aligned with the US, I of course think about what is best for the US, because we would be involved probably in any war that the US engages in.
So Australia is keeping a close eye on what's going on here.
That is because if you look at a map, the Pacific Islands sit across the major air and sea approaches to Australia and New Zealand.
And China's been conducting naval drills and occasionally veering close enough to Australia to cause alarm.
How concerned are you about what China's doing?
We're in a state of permanent contest in the Pacific. That's the reality.
But for the people here, that competitive arena is their home. Their governments have tried to avoid being pulled into this contest.
We seek a region free from nuclear weapons, militarization, and geopolitical posturing.
For Pacific Islanders, security means something else.
Climate change is the only threat for us. That's the reality.
Maima Koro has over 20 years' experience working in development across many Pacific Island countries. She's from Samoa and Tokelau.
It's embedded as an existential threat.
That's important because it helps us explain how the China-Australia struggle for influence began. Australia has long been the island's closest partner. But Pacific leaders grew frustrated with Australia's dismissive stance on climate change, including here, where these Australian ministers were caught on camera joking after a trip to Papua New Guinea. It caused outrage across the Pacific. Trust in Australia dived. For China, it was an opportunity to cozy up to the islands. Since then, Australia and China have been racing to sign deals with Pacific Island countries, providing them with infrastructure and healthcare. Then this happened.
China and the Solomon Islands this week agreed to a controversial security deal.
The actual text of the deal is secret, but a version leaked online suggested the Solomon Islands could get security support from China's armed forces and offer ports for Chinese ships. These clauses caused such alarm in Australia that it even took front seat in Australia's national election.
China continues to see that for relatively low expenditure, it can achieve relatively high strategic bang for its buck in the Pacific. Because the region is so strategically important to Australia, New Zealand, the US and others, it could make Australia and others very anxious.
Western media and governments seem obsessed with the China threat. But what does this kind of deal look like from a Pacific Islands perspective? Let's stay with the Solomon Islands for a second and rewind to 2019.
Solomon Islands' decision to establish relations with the People's Republic of China is based on our national interests.
The Solomon Islands, along with Nauru and Kiribati, joined those in the region who recognized Beijing. What did they get out of it? It opened the door to Chinese investment. The Solomon Islands were able to build roads and upgrade ports, plus this stadium was built with Chinese money. But the decision to get closer to China was also controversial. Riots driven by concern over China's involvement and anti-government sentiment erupted, with Chinatown in the capital city as their focal point. Then we know what happened. The security pact got signed, Australia got anxious. So Australia started to re-engage with and invest more in the Solomon Islands and others.
Pacific Island countries have recognised that they have the agency to use this geopolitical moment to advance their priorities and their interests. So they're very adept at using different partners' interests to play partners off against one another to advance what they want to achieve.
What the Pacific Islands want to achieve includes addressing the most pressing issue they are facing. Sea levels are rising so fast on these low-lying islands that some entire countries, like Tuvalu, could be underwater by the end of the century. These parts of the Solomon Islands are already underwater. This village in Kiribati had to be abandoned entirely. And over in Vanuatu, this graveyard is already being lost to the waves. Vanuatu insists that climate change be a part of its deals.
The interest is very much from Australia's side on security and from Vanuatu saying, yes, we can work with you on that, but you must not forget the development cooperation side. For us, it's climate security and development cooperation are twins in that negotiation. And for us, that's what security means. It is making sure that we have the ability to be resilient in the face of climate change.
Vanuatu is not afraid to refuse to sign deals that don't suit it. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese once went there to sign a bilateral pact, only to leave empty-handed. Vanuatu accused Australia of bullying, but stood its ground. But the islands haven't always been in a position to do this.
The Pacific knows the value of peace as we had lived through the horrors of its absence.
Almost all the Pacific Islands were colonized. And in World War II, they became a key battleground. The US and its allies fought here and eventually defeated Japanese troops. Starting in the Cold War, the US, the UK, and France used the Pacific Island countries they had colonized as a nuclear testing ground, detonating over 300 nuclear weapons. One of the tests was thought to be 1,000 times bigger than the bomb the US dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. And the US dumped its nuclear waste in this dome too. It's now at risk of collapsing, a constant reminder of the deadly nuclear legacy. Then some things started to change. First, most of the Pacific Islands gained independence. Second, they founded what's now the Pacific Island Forum, which includes Australia and New Zealand. Anna Nauper worked as a policy advisor there. Working together has been effective for these countries.
Form of collective diplomacy. In Western terms, you'd say it's negotiating as a bloc. And that's what that's a very key Pacific strategy in terms of multilateral affairs.
They have also rebranded themselves. They are no longer small island states, but large ocean states, collectively the Blue Pacific.
Together, we are an oceanic superpower. We are the stewards of the world's largest ocean, the largest ecosystem, and the largest carbon sink.
It has been quite effective to orchestrate around the ocean as their identity. One of the things that I see, not just from the political leaders, but from the elders, from the youth, it's the confidence that is coming through with the reframing of the Pacific.
That reframing of the Pacific has its origins in this moment. This UN vote led to exclusive economic zones, or EEZs. In other words, that countries would have control over the resources in their surrounding waters. This gave the independent Pacific Islands rights over massive ocean areas, and Kiribatis is the biggest of the lot. Here's why. Imagine this is an island. Its EEZ could extend up to 200 nautical miles around it. And Kiribatis Islands are very spread out, giving it an EEZ in 3 parts, and an ocean territory around 4,000 times its landmass. And yes, it is pronounced Kiribati, that's how it's pronounced in the local language Gilbertese. Kiribati generates up to 70% of its government revenue through selling tuna fishing licenses for its oceans to countries like Japan, China, the US, and EU members. If you've ever eaten tuna, it may well have been caught here. These 8 countries teamed up in the Nauru Agreement to control fishing access to an area that's home to about a quarter of the world's tuna. It covers almost 15 million square kilometers, an area bigger than the contiguous United States, so this part. So the Pacific Islands are leveraging their resources while trying to protect their oceans at the same time. But there are limitations. There's the issue of illegal fishing. And China and the US are pushing to mine the Pacific seabed for valuable minerals. Some places, like the Cook Islands, could gain financially from it, but mining would damage the marine ecosystems these nations depend on.
The ocean has been the tool that people have been using for their own survival over the civilization of Pacific communities.
But it's also a source of vulnerability. Remember Tuvalu, the country predicted to be mostly underwater by the end of the century? It's literally building more landmass to stay above the waves longer. But even this is a stopgap measure. So Tuvalu negotiated a unique deal with Australia to allow its citizens to apply for a climate change visa to relocate there.
The fact that Tuvalu was able to influence Australia to achieve that is notable. It's unthinkable that any other country in the world would be able to achieve that.
Under this deal, up to 280 Tuvalans a year are granted the visa in a lottery. In the first year, over 3,000 applied, a third of the entire population. But in the longer term, what will happen to the country, its culture, heritage, and languages, if it's submerged?
We'll move them to the cloud.
This is a radical project by the Tuvalan government to save them. a digital twin of the country. It's based on a 3D scan of all of Tuvalu's 124 islands, and they are creating a digital identity system where Tuvalans can have passports and vote. As for its exclusive economic zone, Tuvalu is demanding to keep rights over its ocean, even if its landmass disappears underwater. Other islands are taking legal fights to the UN. Vanuatu spearheaded a movement that got an international court to recognize that countries have a legal responsibility to reduce their emissions. Because Pacific Island countries can't tackle climate change on their own. Despite being on the front line of the crisis, they are responsible for just 0.03% of global emissions, while their partners, Australia and China, are responsible for a lot more. As the world faces increasing impacts from climate change, maybe that Pacific Island notion of security, resilience in the face of the climate crisis, holds some lessons for the rest of us.